There's so much bad news about our planet, it's overwhelming. The truth is, I've given up. This is the story of a simple solution, a way to heal our planet. The solution is right under our feet, and it's as old as dirt.
All of our soils that are under chemical conventional agriculture are almost completely devoid of microorganisms.
Modern agriculture was not designed for the betterment of the soil.
Fossil fuels are by no means the only thing that is causing climate change. When we damage soils, carbon goes back to the atmosphere.
But when we destroy soil, it releases carbon dioxide.
Biosequestration is using plants, trees, and techniques of grazing and farming to capture carbon and store it in the soil.
We can fix a lot of our climate issues if we bring the CO2 down into a living plant and put it back into the soil where it belongs.
Plants working with soil microorganisms, it seems too simple.
Healthy soils lead to a healthy plant, healthy human, healthy climate.
There could be a way to eat food that heals the planet.
The problem isn't the animal. The problem is where the animals are at.
How do we take waste and repurpose and reuse it, because it's really not waste?
The poop has to stay in the loop.
Compost is just one of a suite of soil-based carbon capture solutions.
We know how to do it. And if we continue to scale over 30 years, we can reverse global warming.
We can get the Earth back to the Garden of Eden that it once was by regeneration.
To see biodiversity return to a place that was completely devastated.
That gives me hope.
Our health and the health of our planet are connected.
If you look over here, my neighbor's land that has been chemical fallow, then you look over at our paddocks, you have a diversity of different plant species. Which model do you want your food to be produced from? The answer is pretty simple to me.
I'll make you a deal. I won't give up, and neither should you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name's Dr. Ayana Johnson. I'm a marine biologist and a policy nerd, and I work on climate solutions. And I'm really excited to be here with Josh and Rebecca, the filmmakers for Kiss the Ground. And I'd love to start just by hearing from you, sort of like what led to deciding to create the film, and maybe, you know, a little bit of introduction of yourselves by way of answering.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, and first of all, it's an honor to be on, this session with you, Ayana. Just your TED Talks and your work with oceans. It's fantastic, and it's great.
And my dad's a farmer too, so yeah. I'm sure we could have some.
There we go.
Yeah. Over a glass of wine.
Sure.
I'm Rebecca Tickell. This is Josh Tickell. We're environmental documentary filmmakers. Kiss the Ground is our 14th environmental documentary film. Our first film was called Fuel, that won the Sundance Audience Award in 2007, and that largely chronicled Josh and the veggie van and his journey from growing up in Cancer Alley to showing people how they could make their own fuel from a waste stream, specifically using used cooking oil. So I saw him on the Today Show when I was 17, driving the veggie van across the country, and was super inspired by that, this idea that, you know, it's actually, the concept is regeneration. We just didn't have the language for it yet.
Yeah.
And then we got together. I saw him driving the veggie van, and I was like, that's my guy right there. And we got together and made our first one, Fuel. And then we've made a bunch of films since then, 4 films that dealt specifically with oil and fossil fuels and reducing carbon emissions. And that was an interesting adventure. Mm-hmm. And then all of our films ultimately led us to Kiss the Ground, which is ultimately a film about how we can reverse climate change through drawdown, also known as biosequestration, which is taking the carbon out of the atmosphere, out of the oceans, and storing it in healthy living soil. And to us, that was like revolutionary, that this is like the single most actionable thing that we can do to reverse climate change. And most people had never even heard of it. We didn't really know much about it. So Kiss the Ground is our 7-year journey to make a film that shows how, through biosequestration, we can reverse climate change.
So Josh, for you, what was that moment where you were like, it's all about soil? Like, what was it that led to that for you, for the both of you? And when did that click?
Well, I mean, we have been participating in a climate conversation for the better part of 2 decades, both as individuals and then as partners. And I think for us, we and a lot of people in the climate movement felt that we weren't getting to the point where there was an actionable, clear solution other than screwing in a light bulb, which just feels so self-defeating. It's soul-crushing. Like, you just know that when you're putting that light bulb in, yes, you're going to make a difference, but you're not fixing the big, hairy, scary problem. Mm-hmm. And I think the big moment for us, our community began to rally around soil, and there started to be this conversation. The big moment for us is when we started to see the number crunching, and we started to look at gigatons and hundreds of gigatons, and all of a sudden we were at 1,000 gigatons of potential sequestration. And when you start to really play in that kind of mega space, and you go, okay, but is this possible? And you run the numbers again in different ways, and that was a big moment because there was a distinctive kind of wow, we've got 100 scientists, we've got the IPCC, we've got NASA, we've got NOAA, and these numbers check out, and this is big. But now we're going to have to tell a really sciencey, geeky, boring story. How do we do that? And that took some time.
So for those who aren't familiar with this idea of regenerative farming, this idea of how much carbon soils can absorb versus emit, can you give us a little bit of a rundown on what does this mean? What actually is the solution that you're talking about? Give us a little bit of nuts and bolts. Either one of you that wants to take this one.
Can I?
He's good at the nuts and bolts. I'm good at the bottom line. So
okay.
Let's do one and the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll give you some nuts and bolts. So, if we look at regeneration as a concept, regeneration is the underlying basis for ecology. That is the operating system for ecology. So, if a tree loses a leaf, it grows another leaf. A lizard loses a tail, it grows another tail. We as humans, because of our eyes and our sort of ocular way of dealing with the world as bipeds, we tend to see things in a very micro way. It's either here or it's here. What's hard for us to realize, and what's very new in terms of our consciousness as a species and our science, is being able to pull back far enough to be wow, ecology works exactly the same way at a micro level as it does a macro level. A desert that was once a forest contains much of the ecological memory to become a forest again. What does it need? It needs management. It needs manure. It needs water. It needs some, catalyst to get it going. But the desert can regenerate and become a forest just as the lizard can regenerate a tail. So now we want to get even more macro and look at the planet itself. And when we look at climate change, we're like, oh, carbon, fossil fuels, they are issues. This is how we put the carbon up there. But if you really look at the macro issue, we have a carbon misplacement issue. We've put the carbon in the wrong place. Earth, the biogenic cycle of Earth, has within it the operating system to bring that carbon back into the soil. And it does that through regeneration, through regenerating green living tissue, plant tissue on a macro scale. That requires carbon. That plant material puts the carbon in the soil. And can it be done at a scale that will balance what we call our legacy load, the stuff we put up there through fossil fuels? Yes, it can. And that's the big idea, is a macro scale, large international effort to regenerate the 2/3 of the planet, which human beings have stripped largely in 10,000 years.
So you talked about the part about bringing the carbon back into the soil. And I love this notion of, carbon itself is not the enemy, right? It's an atom. it's an element of life. It's just in the wrong place. And so you talked about the sort of bringing it back, but how did it get out? Let's talk, like, for those who aren't familiar with sort of like how industrial farming is actually releasing carbon.
Yes. So the way that we're currently farming is taking all of that healthy living soil and just it's killing it. We're tilling it, we're spraying it with chemicals, and as a result, the soil that's healthy soil is 50% carbon by weight. So when you strip that soil of microorganisms and life, and that life literally evaporates right out of the ground, so does the carbon. And so, like Josh said, it's in the atmosphere. Our oceans have absorbed as much of it as they possibly can. But all of that carbon can be drawn, they're calling it drawdown, back into healthy soil using some of these regenerative practices that you mentioned. But, and this isn't a new phenomenon. This is something that human beings have been doing. This is in the Bible. This is the big change for us is right here. It's changing the way that we relate to the environment around us. Instead of going in this kind of linear way that we've been doing, like in Exodus from the Bible, which is we go in, we over-extract the resources from that land. We are overpopulated. We start fighting over the resources as they become more scarce. We desertify the land, push away the water. Suddenly everyone's left fighting over what resources are left, and people get, the people who have less weapons get pushed off of the land. And so, and this is what we've been doing since the beginning of time. But now, as Josh said, we're doing it on a global scale. So we're looking at all of us being in this together. There's no one of us that is immune from the possibility of becoming a climate refugee. I mean, here in California, we've been having these mega fires. So I think our question is, are we ready for the lesson? Are we ready for the lesson that indigenous people have known for a long time, the way that the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota people would follow the buffalo in a sacred hoop around the fertile plains of the U.S. that built America, that it only took us 100 years to destroy after we, robbed the land of the buffalo that was creating all of that abundance and that life in the soil that the people would then follow and reap in that abundance. So are we willing to look forward 7 generations into the future the way that indigenous people have known to do and rebuild the life in that soil so that it can take care of humanity way into the future from now? Or are we going to continue to do what we've done in the past and to continue to desertify and rob ourselves of our livelihood, which is what we've been doing the way that we've been practicing agriculture?
So what I'm hearing from you both is that, like, there's a lot going on that we're not talking about, right? Like, we're not talking about the way things used to be and indigenous knowledge of land management. We're not talking about how how industrial agriculture is a part of the climate problem and how regenerative could be part of the climate solution. I was glad to hear you, Rebecca, mention the ocean. We're certainly not talking enough about how the ocean plays a role in this. The ocean has, in fact, absorbed about 1/3 of the carbon dioxide we've emitted by burning fossil fuels, and over 90% of the heat that we've trapped with those greenhouse gases has been absorbed by the ocean. So shout out to the ocean for trying to save us from ourselves, but it's maxed out, as you described. Yeah. So Rebecca, you mentioned before that that you're the one who can talk about the bottom line. So of course, farmers, my mother is a farmer upstate New York. She has a pension from being a teacher, so she is not depending on farming for her income. But through meeting a lot of farmers upstate over the past 20 years, I've gained a very deep respect for A, how hard farming is, and B, how hard it can be to make ends meet because of how little often people in the U.S. are willing to pay for food, and just unpredictability of the weather as the climate continues to change. So yeah, it would be great to hear from you more about sort of the bottom line of shifting from these industrial practices, which are pretty clearly bad for ecosystems and balance, right? Whether it's the pesticides or the carbon balance. But can people really sort of make a living? Can people afford to make this transition? What does that part of it look like?
This agricultural model that we currently have has unfortunately put all of the farmers that are in that system pretty much on life support. in the sense that the cost to farm continues to increase. The cost of inputs, the cost of the fertilizer, everything continues to increase while the profit margins continue to decline. And the whole system has been propped up by a subsidy system that's not forward thinking and not helping these farmers to think about how they can actually farm for soil management. So what we're seeing is our tax dollars getting poured into this broken system that ultimately is contributing to the desertification of the planet. And it's really easy to blame farmers for being a part of that system, but the truth of the matter is that they want out of this broken system as much as we want them to have the support they need to get out of it. But it's like, most farmers are looking at like a 10-year track to bankruptcy, realistically, without
that seems long to me, knowing how tenuous a lot of folks' scenarios is.
Yeah.
And how incredible would it be if instead of those subsidies going to just continue to prop up this broken model that doesn't create nutrient-dense food, that's pushing water away, that's destabilizing the planet, how great would it be if instead we were taking that subsidy money and helping the farmers to take that transition, that 3 to 5 year transition, where they can have built-in insurance through biodiversity. No cash insurance that you can buy will ever provide the insurance that biodiversity on a farm can provide, not only in helping to create consistent weather patterns, but in drawing rain consistently, but also in having this spongy, healthy soil that absorbs all of that carbon and all of that water. And ultimately what that means for the farmer is they exponentially increase the profits that they have per acre per year. Where, a farmer may be making $1 or $5 per acre per year. Farmers who are practicing regenerative agriculture are making $100 per acre per year. That's a huge leap. And that's what's possible through making the transition. And that's how we're going to feed the world.
Part of what you mentioned just now is sort of like how we're subsidizing and investing in the wrong things, right? Instead of investing in this transition to a way of growing food that restores nature and supports our own health. So it sounds to me like there's a policy element of this too, right? So is your next film, Josh, going to be about the Farm Bill? Yes or no?
Not exactly.
Another really exciting cliffhanger subject for us to tackle.
You look, we made a bunch of movies about oil, so we reserve the right to continue down the path of soil for a minute. I think what we're trying to do is lay the groundwork for good policy and not involve this subject in politics. So we're trying to create a new sort of a layman's term book, if you will, for accessing soil-based good changes that need to happen. And there's some big policy changes. Look, we're spending, between $100 billion and $1 trillion, depending on how you crunch the numbers, on subsidizing foods that are bad for the soil, bad for the climate, bad for the animals, and ultimately bad for humans. That's just the United States. That's insane. We're paying farmers to go bust. That's insane. So we could turn those models around. They could be revenue positive. They could be tax-based positive. I'm not saying take away all the safety nets for farmers, not at all. But I am saying let's put in place policies that make sense long-term. So for the next film, let's see.
I know. I'm getting ahead of us here.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this film. So one of the topics that you cover is compost. So can you talk a little bit about what is the role that compost plays in this broader cycle of regeneration?
Yeah, so compost, I like to call compost sort of the gateway to getting into regeneration. Because a lot of people, let's face it, the majority of our population is packed into urban or suburban areas, and not everybody has access to an acre to play with regeneration. But most people have a kitchen. And that's where regeneration starts. It starts with what we're throwing in the trash can. And composting can be done in an apartment. It can be done on a small area of countertop with or without worms. And once you make the first bit of soil, and you don't actually do it, microbes do it, but you feel like you do it, it's really addictive. And it's like, oh my gosh, I made soil, now I want to make more. And, people text us pictures of compost piles from all over the world. And they say, kiss the ground made me do it. And it's their compost pile because everyone can do it. What do? You take your food scraps and you layer those scraps with some kind of carbon dense thing, whether that's newspapers or napkins or wood chips or cardboard or leaves. And then you layer more food scraps, and you do that. You can do it in a bin, you can do it in a bucket, you can do it in a backyard. But the microbial diversity that comes out of that compost pile and the richness, it is like if you want to create bread, you need a starter culture. Compost is the starter culture to regeneration. So if you want to regenerate a park, a landscape, a farm, an ecosystem, either compost or cow manure have this microbial boom boost of energy. And that's when we talked about deserts going back into forests. You've got to wake the microbes up. You've got to create a microbe starter culture. And that's why our guts are healthy, a very, very firm and dense microbial community. We don't actually eat soil. We don't eat food. Microbes eat food, and then we eat basically microbe poop. And in the same way, the ecosystem needs that same thing. They need those microbes processing all of the material and bringing the nutrients to life. So compost is your way that you can participate in regeneration wherever you live.
So now I feel like the takeaway from this panel for some number of people is going to be like, I eat microbe poop.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting way to think about it.
So you got to keep
describing
alive. You
gotta
realize
keep
you're taking care of an ecosystem.
You got to feed the microbes so they can feed you. Yeah. Right. Listening to you talk about compost reminds me of a few things, and one of those is I grew up in a city in Brooklyn, New York, but we had a little backyard behind our brownstone, and my favorite family picture is actually me with my parents sitting on the compost pile after we had just a whole bunch of leaves on top of it. And so it's so rare for a city kid to have that chance to see soil get made. And I'm totally sure that changed my life. The moment where you flip it and you get the good stuff out from the bottom, I was like, it is pure magic, right?
It is magic.
We made dirt.
It's magic.
And so, I think there's a great trend, right, where more and more cities and towns are creating this municipal composting programs. You can bring your food scraps to the farmers market, and sort of helps people who don't really want to do it in their kitchens. But then you don't get the magic of seeing it become dirt. So what other, in this vein of things that will hook people on this transition and on what is possible, are there other sort of elements or solutions from the film that you think are going to draw more people in? Because not everyone's going to become a farmer, right? Although we can all sort of support, food that's grown in the good way.
Yeah, I think, everybody, even if you just have a backyard like you had growing up, in addition to composting, people can grow, fruit trees in the backyard, or, any type of perennial that you can grow in the small little bit of dirt that we're lucky enough to be the stewards of. We're a farmer. There's something so beautiful and powerful about growing something, even if it's not our whole diet. Just being able to have that connection to the earth, I think, is such an important part for all of us in making that mental shift, and such an important reminder of thinking about where our food is coming from. And I think that's the other big thing. I know that there's going to be another talk specifically about food, but I think every time, without being preachy, I do think it's important to remember that each time we're making a choice for what we're going to eat, we're also making a choice to either regenerate the earth or degenerate the earth. Is the food that I'm putting in my mouth right now, was it raised in a way that is humane? Is it something that's putting carbon back into the soil? Is this something that's going to be a part of the carbon economy? Am I putting my dollars towards sequestering carbon in the ground? And every time we choose what food we're eating, we're participating in that. And there are ways to do it that are not too expensive, just by simply participating in the local farmers market and getting to know what farmers in your area are integrating these practices. And then if they're not, what a great opportunity to start talking about soil health, but being careful to not fall into that trap of making farmers wrong, because farmers really need a lot of love and they need a lot of support. And really, it's just an information gap. Let's teach farmers, if they don't know already, let's support them in having profit in their business, which they can. Yeah.
This has been such a great chat. There's obviously a lot more to talk about. There's a lot more in the film, so people will just have to watch the film to get the rest of the inside scoop. So thank you, Josh and Rebecca. The film is on Netflix, Kiss the Ground, so please go check it out. And is there any closing thought you want to leave folks with about sort of like having made the film and putting it out in the world? Like what has that brought to you or brought up, or what's in the front of your minds right now?
I think this is just the beginning of the journey, and I think folks watch the film, share it with your friends, share it with your family. You try to do a lot in 85 minutes, and obviously the film is not the end all of this conversation, but hopefully it is the beginning of a conversation that we can co-create, you can co-create, Ayana, and we can all participate in that. It's an exciting new time for us all.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.